So I'll say something like, I'm going to give you my driver's license and my credit card with my toes. Bet you haven't seen that before. And I hope you don't mind. It changes the moment dramatically, because then you're not on the offensive. That's not the right word. But I know for a fact, even when you and I first met each other online, Doug, you're a human being. It takes a little bit of time for people to adjust to the very simple fact, I have no arms. And that's just not every day.
Welcome to the podcast that guides men to demystify and develop their intuition. I'm your host, Doug Beitz. Let's dig into the science and expand your horizons. Today's guest, Alvin Law, is an international keynote speaker, two-time Hall of Fame recipient, Emmy Award winner, world-class musician, and best-selling author. In his 40-plus years of public speaking, Alvin has entertained more than 2 million people across 5 different continents. His incredible true story inspires audiences to explore their lives with greater imagination and transform their obstacles into amazing opportunities. When he's not on stage, Alvin loves mastering sports video games and prides himself on being the best driver in his family. He shares his life with his wife and business partner, Darlene, his adult son, Vance, and assorted pets. They all live in beautiful Calgary, Canada. Alvin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, Doug. I mean, what a thrill to have this happen so quickly. It feels like you just sent me a note saying, would you like to be a guest? And here we are.
Yeah, cool. So in your bio there, it says you pride yourself on being the best driver in your family. So to give some context to the listeners who aren't watching on YouTube, why is that relevant at all?
Well, one of the ironic parts about podcasts is when they are audio only, and I try to describe my body, but the good news is because we're on video, you might not be able to tell unless I turn, but I'm missing my arms, although accurately speaking, they were never there. So it's not like they're, in the garage in a box marked stuff. I was born this way. And why that is in the biographical line is it's meant to be a bit, not provocative, but, for people to perk their ears and go, what has driving got to do with anything? Well, I drive a regular car. I steer with my right foot on the wheel and my left foot on the gas, and I don't need any controls. People say, well, what about hand controls? And my answer is usually a bit cheeky. I go, well, that would be redundant. But the reality is, in my lifetime, I've had less collisions, that would be one, in my entire life driving since 1975. And my wife and son, we won't talk about how many they've had. Not a lot, but that's where that line comes from. I have the cleanest driving record in the family, which of course is also meant to be a bit which is really what my life is about in so many respects. So I hope your viewers brought their sense of humor today, because we're definitely going to have a few moments that might surprise people.
Yeah. So are you saying, is your car been altered in any way, or it's just a stock car?
No, in fact, the first time I traveled to Australia, this is just a cute story to start with. We were renting a car from a dealership, one of the big names, and it was within walking distance of our hotel in downtown Sydney. So it wasn't at an airport. And when I walked in and gave them my driver's license with my toes, the lady said, you realize that this is a very expensive car you're getting. And for your viewers there, you would know this more than we would in North America. This was like 1996. It was a brand new Holden. Yep. And it was beautiful. And I said, yeah, I know. She says, yeah, but we're kind of worried about giving you such an expensive car when you have no arms. And I said, has anyone ever had an accident with one of these cars? And she said, sure. And I said, were they driving with their hands? And she said, yeah. I said, case closed. Give me the car. So, it's funny because I can rent cars, no problem. But that's more of a function of not my ego, but a function of time, which we're going to talk a lot about today. Because in 1975, when I learned to drive, we didn't have the accessories we have now today. I don't know that would have made a difference, though, because if you think about it, and we will definitely be talking about this, my hands are literally right here. And that's a very warm and fuzzy thing to say. But the reality is I learned to use my feet for hands. So when it came to driving a car, my father, in this case, was very responsible by saying, look, you better learn to drive a regular car because you're not going to be able to have something special every time you go out there. He didn't know I was going to be a speaker, obviously, but that's how it started, and probably more old school than anything else.
Yeah. So, like, can you drive a stick shift, or
Well,
is it automatic?
I'm supposed to have an automatic, and I say
Right.
supposed to because I have lots of stories when I was a teenager of doing silly things in a small town in Canada where we were bored. And one of those included driving a very, very fast Camaro. I think it was a 1969 with a gigantic motor and one of those big shifters that were right by the console. And I had to figure out a way to put the clutch in, but also gear shift. And that meant no steering wheel. And I learned left knee, keeping control. Anyway, we won't go into that. Just lucky we didn't get into an accident that day. It's funny.
Yeah. And I know in my teenage years, my first couple of cars were designed to race. They were fast and just what we did. Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. Like that you even were able to handle that at all, like just with the 2 feet with, like say, you got to work out how to steer when you've got one on the clutch and the other one.
Well, and not to curse myself here, but I always say my last accident, which was exactly that. It was just dumb, stupid teenager driving. I lost control on a slippery road and hit a tree. And it wasn't even like I was goofing around. It was just one of those silly things that happened. But I haven't had an incident since. So how long ago was that? 1978? Let's compare records with all of your viewers. Have we all got a clean driving record like that? Anyway, it's just that's why I say the sense of humor. Because, of course, there's a very serious side to my life. But I always looked at it with a grain of salt. And mostly, and this is very profound, I think, everything I did because of the era and probably also because of no internet was a first. Nobody had ever seen anything like this before. They never heard anything like this before. So, you could look at it and say, well, what do you do with that? Well, again, it was common sense, practical living in my home in small town Canada. But it was just so normal for me to use the idea. And I can't even do the air quotes, Doug, but you know what I mean? It was just normal. I'm totally normal. And I don't do that and say that as a human rights or politically correct statement. It's a fact. I was born this way. That's who I am.
Yeah. And so for some of our younger viewers who wouldn't be familiar with the term thalidomide, and I've read in your stuff that that's what happened there. Your mother and thalidomide, from my very ignorant knowledge, was a pharmaceutical drug that people were prescribed, ladies were prescribed for something. I don't even know why they took it. And it caused birth defects. And how many years did that occur over? Like 1 or 2 or more? Or?
Well, there's a lot of anecdotal chat about this. It was actually technically from around 1956 or 57, early 57. It started more in Germany because the drug company was based in Germany. And if your listeners or viewers want to look this up, just to look it up, it's a big word. I'm not going to try to have everybody figure out what it is, but it's Grunenthal. I don't even try to spell it, but it's a German drug company called Grunenthal. And Grunenthal made this drug as the first ever non-barbiturate sleeping pill. But in those days, we didn't have to test pharmaceuticals to put them onto market. The tests then, which if you think about it, were so silly, were literally picking people from a group of individuals, doctors giving out samples of the new drug, asking people what they thought of it verbally, and then if there was problems, they would react. But it sounds silly today, doesn't it? But that's just the way it was. Look how far we've come. But what happened during this phase of people saying, well, how did you do? One woman asked, and this is an absolutely true story, I'm pregnant. Should I be taking sleeping products because I can't sleep? But more than anything, I have severe morning sickness. So, it's like throwing dice, I suppose. She took a chance, took a couple of the pills. Her morning sickness literally went away. So, of course, the light bulb went off for Grunenthal, and they started marketing it as a morning sickness medication. But, of course, the very dark history of the drug is it deformed close to 20,000 babies when it was pretty much banned for giving to pregnant women around 1963 by the then version of the World Health Organization. It didn't exist then. But this was a very big controversy. But you're absolutely right, Doug. If you're of a certain age, you would have never heard of it. But of course, the context of it is everything, right? It was very prevalent in Australia. I don't know the number of survivors in Australia, but I can tell you that your Australian government and your Australian association have been very active in making the wrong right. So Australia has actually done very well responding to clearly was a terrible part of our history. But there's a lot of things that are a terrible part of our history, and we have to learn from it. Hopefully, don't do it again.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm curious. It's like, so you've seemed to have handled the whole thing extremely well. Your attitude towards life, etc. Like you say, is complete. It's not normal. Your attitude towards life. It's above normal. It's superior. You're up in that small percentile in the top end of attitude towards life. And yet a lot of people would go like, "There's this guy like." There's no way I'd rent this guy a car. He's got no arms, like, so how many times have you gone to an airport or wherever and had them like look at you like you're kidding, aren't you? Like you want to rent a car and you grab the keys off them with your toes. They're like, are they shocked every time or?
I would say shocked would be a good word, but with the function, and I'm just going to say how it normally works when I travel, even in Australia, you get to where you're picking your car up at the airport and you're renting your vehicle, and the only people that see your documents are the security people exiting the airport. So you don't even have contact with the rental people, but that only occurs when you've got a certain amount of status. That's when things change. I started renting cars in like 1981. And, in Canada, we didn't even have our faces on our driver's licenses. So yeah, you can well imagine I went through a lot of hoops and a lot of cynics. But you said it. And I think your audience is going to hear a lot about this today. And I hope your audience understands. I didn't just flick a switch before I turned on my iPad here to talk to you today. This is pretty much the way I am all the time. And that is a function of how I grew up. And that story is very profound. But here's a line that I think you're going to maybe have a few eyebrows raised. One of the fundamental beliefs in our home in small town, it's called Yorkton, Saskatchewan, Canada. My parents were very old school, literally. They viewed everything in life not as a right, but as a privilege. That's just how they saw it. It was their age. It was their mentality. So when you have that kind of mindset growing up, you don't get to the rental counter when they give you a bit of flack and pull out the politically correct card or the human rights card. You educate them. And of course, what changed everything was when we started having faces on our driver's licenses so they can look. But if they're really paying attention, they would notice that I'm a top tier member of the big car rental agencies. Why? Because I'm a business traveler. I do it all the time. Before COVID, it was pretty common for me to rent probably 40, 50 cars a year. Now, people would say, why don't you just take an Uber or hire a car service? Or I don't take cabs, Doug, because they never stop when you raise your foot and go, hey. But I feel a great sense of independence driving my own car because I've also got my luggage to worry about. I can't just jump on a trolley, for example, or even take a train sometimes is very difficult. So having my own form of transportation. But to directly respond to your question, it's the way you handle the question. And I've always said to myself, I get that. In fact, it was just a few years ago that my wife said, why don't you ever say anything when you encounter an individual in a customer service setting? And I go, why do I have to say something? It's not really up to me. And she says, Alvin, it totally is up to you. So now let's just give a hypothetical that happens all the time. Whether it's at the security gate or if I happen to have to go to the counter, I always make a little joke. So I'll say something like, I'm going to give you my driver's license and my credit card with my toes. Bet you haven't seen that before. And I hope you don't mind. It changes the moment dramatically because then you're not on the offensive. That's not the right word. But I know for a fact, even when you and I first met each other online, Doug, you're a human being. It takes a little bit of time for people to adjust to the very simple fact, I have no arms. And that's just not every day. We see people in wheelchairs say every day, or we see people in who are blind or deaf use sign language. That's so common in our world. But it's the way that you react to the question. And of course, yes, I've had people question it, but only one time did I actually have any fuss. And that was actually, ironically, again, not in Canada or in America. It was in England. Same thing. Walked into the agency, go to get my car. And that young lady, you want to hear this? This is hilarious considering what she said. You have to have both hands on the steering wheel when you drive in England. And I said, what if you drive a manual car? Oh, she goes, that doesn't count. I went, okay, you know what? It does count. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to get into this. And to be quite honest about this, we drove out of the lot with my wife behind the wheel, and she hated it because it was right side drive, right? We steer on the left in Canada. We drove about a block, changed seats. I drove the rest of the way. But here's what's funny. We took the case not to a human rights tribunal, but to the customer service executive of that particular company, which in this case, I'll just tell you, it was Hertz. And the vice president of international customer relations was shocked. And I'm not proud to say this, Doug, but I'll tell you the end result of that experience, the young lady who managed that particular Hertz outlet in Buckingham Palace area, London, sadly lost her job. But frankly, she wasn't a very good manager because she wasn't paying attention. In that case, I was a Hertz President's Circle Gold Club member, which means I've driven a few of their cars before.
Yeah. Actually, I remember going to Vegas years ago, renting a car, and I loved the system there. You didn't have to even talk to anyone. You just, there was a little digital sign and it told you what bay your car was in and the keys were there. And then when you got in the car, there was a little sign. If you want to upgrade, you know, like if you don't like this car, it's okay. Like just these other cars are, you know, bigger, better. There's BMWs, whatever you want. You know, they're trying to upsell. Just and so you didn't even see anybody. It was great. Yeah, you just and all I'm saying, I do like talking with people, but I don't like being in lines because sometimes you get in a long line, wait. You know, you've traveled, you've had all the security lines, immigration. And then you just want to get in your car and go to the hotel, and now you're in another half an hour line. But yeah, Vegas was great. You just walked down, got in your car, and drove away.
But here's a little secret trick for you there, big guy, and I mean this for everybody watching, because you don't have to have no arms to be a good person, clearly. But what's really hilarious, I would say probably Toronto Airport in Canada is the most common place that I rent cars.
Mm-hmm.
It's more important for me not how I treat the person at the security gate. It's more important to me how I treat the people who return the car when I get back and I give them my keys. I am literally friends with so many of these people that many people in society would view as lower echelon in status because they work in a garage at the airport. We got it backwards. I treat those people really special. And on how I say that, I mean, just chat with them, ask how they're doing. And of course, then you get to know the staff involved at the airport. In this case, so let's just say Toronto. I mean, I was just in Toronto a couple of weeks ago. I got there late because my flight was delayed by 3.5 hours. So of course, my car was gone. And it was a wintry day and I needed a 4-wheel drive. And I asked if I could have one. And they went, we don't have any left here. All we've got is these sedans and they're Mercedes with all-wheel drive. And I went, I actually really want an SUV. Now, if it was somebody else, I don't know what they would have done. But they know it was Alvin Law. They went, oh, Mr. Law, if you can wait about 15 minutes, we can get one from the other garage. Well, that's what they did. Because I've always treated them well, guess what they do when you ask a favor? Yeah, it's just simple common sense of how we treat people, no matter who they are.
Yeah. That vibe you're putting out, you know, you're attracting, you know, they say you make your own luck, you know,
Totally.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Life is like that. I'm just curious too. This is like a out there kind of question, but what's your greatest fear?
Well, my greatest fear is actually in many respects coming true right now. And that is the post-COVID reset of the convention and meetings industry. I mean, I haven't done anything else in my adult life, pretty much. I mean, I started speaking in 1981.
So how old were you when you went on that circuit?
20.
Wow.
Yeah, and we'll get into this more, of course, but I didn't plan to be a speaker. It wasn't a thing then. Let's do the math. It wasn't a thing. There wasn't an industry. But what happened was I was a disc jockey. again, I'm going to say this. I hate to be repetitive, old school, but here we go again. I was an old school disc jockey at a FM radio station, again in Canada, that played classic vinyl. So we were spinning records. We, mean me in that case. And I had a shift. And the only thing I had to have was a higher chair so that I could put the records on the player on the turntable with my foot. And I wasn't DJing like we have at clubs where you're scratching and mixing. It was a radio station job. Yeah. But I chose it. I went to college for it because in those days I was living a very practical existence. And again, I got a lot of coaching from my parents, from teachers in my high school. You know, I wanted to be something else, but I decided to be logical. And logic meant use your voice. Doesn't matter what you look like. I, sidestepped television, not to play that game, but radio was perfect. It combined another interest of mine, which is a love for music. So I was able to play these albums, talk about the story behind the band, even make audio documentaries using a reel-to-reel tape deck and editing with a razor blade in my toes. Don't do this at home, folks. I'm a professional. But that was me. That was just how my mindset worked. But you can't make this stuff up. Something comes into your life that becomes a big flag, and you think, I should pay attention to that. The flag in this case was 1981, which was declared the International Year of Disabled Persons. It just happened. I didn't have anything to do with it. But of course, everybody went, hey, you got no arms. Maybe you know about this. Well, I don't know if I know anything about it at all, except it began a market. Because all of a sudden there were people wanting to have you come and speak to, Rotary or schools or a luncheon, a Chamber of Commerce, whatever. The theme today is International Year of Disabled Persons. And our guest speaker today is a well-known disc jockey from CFMQ, Alvin Law. And I would get there and talk about my story. And one day I went to a function and I got paid $500 because that's what they pay their speakers for this particular convention, right? It was off the books, right? I didn't quit my job, but my mental math went, I'm literally making $425 a month as a disc jockey in 1981. Maybe I should consider this other idea. And, it's a bit of a long story, but the short version is I would eventually quit my radio job, go out and be a speaker for the International Year. But by that time, I'd built up momentum. So I started to get other opportunities to speak and eventually getting a job with a nonprofit agency in Canada that had 5 workshops across the province of Saskatchewan where they employed intellectually handicapped adults. But they also were a function of, in Canada, we call it Easter Seals. I don't know what you'd call it in their March of Dimes, maybe, but it was a charity. So I combined my talent for speaking with the idea of going out and doing community outreach to talk about this agency. But more than anything, I was just well known. So it became a thing. If you were to talk to anybody who went to school in the early 80s in Saskatchewan, Canada, chances are they'd remember Alvin Law because I came to their schools and spoke about not just the year, but the extension of what the ideas behind that year represented. But if we really apply what your show is all about, Doug, this was not an accident. It was meant to be. And it's why I'm still active at 64 years old as a speaker. But I've never been so slow in my entire career. So that's my biggest fear is, have I hit the wall? Am I aging out? Is the industry going to ever recover? I don't know, but it's a little bit scary.
So when he's saying to you, what's your greatest fear? And you're saying this post-COVID era. So is there a lot less gigs out there for people to speak? Obviously during COVID, it would have slowed right down. But after it, is it that way where there's less speaking things?
In my experience, and there may be people watching this that have a different experience, because I'm pretty sure the market in Australia might be a little bit different because it's an enclosed place. And I mean that not by geography, but just by the whole idea. It's expensive to bring a speaker to Australia to speak. So you get people internally to do it. And I don't know what the pricing is. I don't know what the fees are like there. And I don't know that this is going on in Australia. I do know that it's going on in North America. I live in Canada. And I do know that it's a function of the post-COVID reaction. And that is very simply, it seems like that's an awfully long time ago, doesn't it? I know. But if you think about it, there were no events in 2020. There were very few events in 2021 because someone cracked the code, and how hypocritical I'm going to be now. They decided that Zoom would be a great way to have a conference. And I disagreed vehemently because why? I'm self-interest, a little bit, but the real interest is the fact that I know the difference between what happens in a room with 1,200 people versus what happens on a computer with 1,200 people that are all there doing this with their fingers, they're scratching their nose, they're doing this, or they're falling asleep, or they're doing whatever. That doesn't happen in a live audience for one reason, because people are forced to pay attention. But second, there is less engagement between human beings. So what happened, of course, is it worked. It was a budget thing. Now we look at it and go, okay, we're going to be slow recovering. But part of it is money. All right. They decided that why would we put on an event that costs an organization, let's just throw out a number, $50,000 to put on a convention for 1,000 people for 3 days. We can do that for nothing on Zoom. So, of course, there's a certain amount of that. But that is shifting, because that is what people are starting to recognize is not working. We have to have people together in the room again. We have to have people that are able to connect, interact, socialize, but more than anything, share the energy of an amazing room with an amazing speaker and all those things that everybody has in common. I like to say that a lot of the groups I speak to are associations. So those associations mean you're meeting your other peers from all over. And it's the only people on the planet that truly understand exactly what you do. And that's what makes it special. I can imagine it's going to come back. It's just a slow recovery right now.
Yeah. Now, I hear you, because 2 days a week I do fire safety training. I used to be a professional firefighter a long time ago. And yesterday I had 4 groups. So I trained roughly 80 people yesterday. And I put on a song and dance show. Like I'm entertaining them. I've got them. I'm changing their emotions constantly, because I just find they learn so much better. And occasionally we have one large international fast food franchise that's international, and we have the contract to train all their staff. Well, the local staff come to our office and we train them. But every couple of months, the boss gets me on a Zoom call with half a dozen of them out in small rural towns. And I'm supposed to train them the same way on this Zoom call. Oh, it's just horrible. They they're all muted. They all sit back from the camera so you can't see their face, and I just can't interact. And I'm trying to amp it up, trying to make it interesting as much as I can. But look, and I'm not against Zoom at all. We're on Zoom right now, and
I agree.
It early in COVID. There was one lady who I'd been 3 times to the States to travel, and done training courses about energy clearing and stuff with her in person for 5 days each time. They were great. So she then put on a 6-day Zoom event, during COVID, and I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be pretty ordinary. She asked all the attendees to treat it very seriously. She said, book in, like normally you pay a lot of money. You pay for your accommodation, you all travel to come to where I am. Book yourself into the local hotel down the road for 5 or 6 days, and treat it properly. I didn't. I stayed at home, but I was actually gobsmacked at how effective it was. It was really, really good, because all the attendees wanted to be there. No one had to be there. We wanted to be there. It was, and we'd all experienced her in person before, and it was wonderful. But yeah, when the students don't necessarily want to be there, it's really hard. Or they're like just dipping their toe in the water, like, let's see what this is about, like you say, and they're sort of sitting there half asleep, or they've got their screen turned off. And yeah, the vibe when you're in the room with them and you can hype them up, and you've got they're eating out of your hand with emotions, and when you stir their emotions, they're getting the message. It locks it in, the frequency there. So, yeah, no, I hear you. Yeah. Now, something you mentioned the word music before, like when you were a DJ and you liked, doing the vinyl, and I'm thinking like I can just see the listeners thinking, how's this guy get like an album with his toes out of the thing, put it on the turntable, put the arm over and not scratch the thing, whatever. But your feet are like our hands. Like they're just, I've seen you on multiple videos using them that good. So I happen to have also seen other videos with you playing instruments. So how many different, and to put this in context, I'm extremely jealous because 8 years ago, once a week, I went to piano lessons for 30 minutes and I bought an 88 key keyboard and I had my headphones plugged into it when I was at home and I practiced. But after a year, I couldn't put 2 to 3 seconds worth anything together. And so what instruments do you play?
Well, if you'll allow me a minute, give you a little bit of a context, which of course is also part of what I do on stage with people. I want to start with the piano, but just back up just a little bit. Put this in the mindset that I'm a kid growing up in rural Canada. My mindset with my wonderful parents, and I have to tell you about them in a minute, were very much, we've already covered it, practical. So if I wanted to play a sport, and we of course have the ancient joke of you call it football. For some reason, North Americans love to call it soccer. And I've never understood where that came from because my dad was British and he hated that. He hated the fact that they called it soccer. But that was the only sport that made sense. And of course, the joke that has been around forever, I never got the handball penalty, right? Haha. But the reality was, I was very understanding of reality. And I'm not trying to say I'm perfect. It was not easy to be this way. But I understood another thing. I wasn't alienated. You know, whenever we hear stories of bullies, they're real and they exist. And we know we've all had perhaps one story or the other. I'm not trying to suggest they don't exist. But they didn't manage my life because I grew up in this small town. So if you messed out with the law kid, everybody knew. And you didn't want to mess around with the law kid because even then there was a consciousness. Don't pick on the kid with no arms. Who does that? So they really generally did it. There was always a couple of bad actors. But the reality was I didn't get all pouty because I couldn't play baseball or I couldn't in Canada, more importantly, play hockey. I mean, to be quite blunt about this, give you an example of my dad, okay? I wanted to play hockey, ice hockey. So what did he do? He didn't call me crazy. He borrowed a pair of skates from a guy he worked with. His son had outgrown them. They were very expensive leather skates with very sharp hockey blades, not figure skating blades. And we had a school across the street. And in Canada, of course, things freeze. So it's very common to have an outdoor arena behind every school. My dad took me to the outdoor arena with very sharp skates. I was 9 years old. Said, if you want to learn how to play hockey, you got to learn how to skate. The first time I skated, I fell right on my face. So what did my dad do? Did he take me up off the ice, and dry my tears, and take me for an ice cream sundae? No, he made me understand this is the price of learning how to skate. So if you want to learn how to skate, you're going to have to figure out a way not to fall. So then it became really numbers. How badly do I really want to play hockey? Not really that bad. But what was going on at the exact same time was I loved music. It was very much a part of our home. We had a radio in the house that often played music. We'd go to church every Sunday where there was church music. I loved to sing in the congregation. But then somebody realized I had a great voice, so then you join the junior choir. And before you know it, you're graduating to the senior choir. And before you know it, you're thinking of, oh, I love to sing. Maybe I could learn how to play the piano. So this is how my brain would operate. My brain didn't go, that's just silly. My brain said, if you can do all these other things, try the piano, which I did. And I played that little song called Chopsticks. And I played, really, it got annoying. We didn't have a piano. But, you know, whenever I was around one, so mom one day decided, let's go see if a lady will teach you piano lessons. Now, you're going to maybe cringe, you and your audience, when you hear this story. But this was 1969 or 1970 maybe. She said, I can't teach you to play the piano because your toes are too short. So you'll never play music. Now, that's not mean. It sounds mean, but in fact, look at my toes. I'm 64. I don't have long toes. Some people have very long toes. You know who you are. Yeah. But that wasn't the point. The point was part of me recognized expertise, and another part of me kind of sat there in my brain thinking, I can figure this out. I never did have to figure it out, though, because the best story ever, may as well get it out of the way now, Doug. I had an opportunity to be in school band. But I want this to be a story very quickly. I don't want to take your entire day on this story, but I want to put it in the right frame. So let's fast forward a year to 1971. A new band director has come to our town of 10,000 people. He's conducting all of the senior orchestras in town, through the high school mostly, but there's music programs throughout all of the schools. So he decides to put out a music aptitude test. I don't even remember what the test was, but I apparently got 96%. But if I can paint an image for your viewers here, Doug, it was literally like a blind tag test because there was, names, but so he didn't know anybody. He was new to town. So he literally phones my mom one day, would Alvin like to be in the band? And mom's going, sure. And I'm sure she's thinking, probably not piano, right? But she's thinking, yeah, he loves music. Do you have an instrument in mind? And literally, this is an all true story. Well, they're all true. With that kind of talent, Mrs. Law, why don't you bring him to the school? He can just pick any instrument he wants. So mom's like, okay, this sounds really nice of you, Mr. McClary, sir. That was his name, Blaine McClary. But have you met him? No, it's got his phone number here. I'm kind of calling you to get permission. Well, yeah, you got my permission, but good time to tell you, our son has no arms. So like so many people, right or wrong, his answer was, you're kidding. No, he was born that way. Well, I've never heard of anything like that in my life, Mrs. Law. There's no way we can put him in the band. I didn't realize that. I'm very embarrassed. Have a good day. And he hangs up. He wasn't rude. See, there's so many of these examples that make perfect sense, except what happens when the story turns because something else becomes the result than what we thought was going to happen. I don't know whether this was meant to be. I would argue it was. I don't think everything is meant to be like some people watching this might. I think some things are a little bit of a coincidence, but we won't get into the semantics, right? Because that's a very difficult argument to have. The reality was, how did I manage to cross paths with a band director who wouldn't let it go? So he figured out a way to mount a trombone on the side of a wooden chair that I played with my right foot. And what I'm doing right now, by the way, is being a little weird, looking down, but I've got my book here, Doug. And I don't want to be a book flogger because I hate speakers that go, want to read my book. Frankly, prohibitively expensive to send you to Australia, my book, because it's only available at my website. Although there is an electronic version. We can talk about the commercial later. But let me show you this picture. Can you see it?
Yep.
See how I'm playing with my right foot?
Yep.
How did he come up with that? What kind of person goes, no arms, trombone? It was literally mounted on the side of a chair that I played with my foot. But that changed my life. And we've heard stories like that lots, I'm sure. But it literally did change my life because all of a sudden I'm in band. But also all of a sudden I'm in band. And I always wanted to do the best I could at everything I tried. Drums were part of my dream. I would always look at drums. Oh, I wish I could play the drums, but I had a trombone, kind of a non-sexy instrument, let's be honest, okay? But because I was so good at band, I got invited to summer camp away from home. And while I was there, in the summer when I was 14, I managed to meet a drum instructor. And I told him privately, I wish I could play the drums. And he goes, well, give it a try. Now, I didn't think to bring my drumsticks, but let me just show you with a pair of chopsticks, which will be a good example to show your audience. I just put them between my toes, see?
Yep.
And I figured out a way to be able to play a drum. But the drum instructor was insistent I find a teacher in my hometown. So I literally found a drum instructor who was a teenager, who was very strict. And the first thing I learned to do, and if your audience is interested in this, look up rudiments of percussion. There's a book for it and everything. They're like scales on a piano, 26 rudiments. You learn to play them with different sticking patterns. And once you learn that, then you've gone to the next level of being able to play a whole kit. So one thing led to another, and I started playing the drums. And the drums were not part of band. They were private for me at home. But my mom and dad, we weren't rich, but they certainly changed my life again when they managed to scrape enough money together to buy me my first ever drum kit at 15 years old. They were cheap, they were old, and they worked. And I just spent hours in my basement imagining, could I be a rock star? Could I be a rock star? And that's really what I wanted to be. But my guidance counselor in high school or career counselor talked me off the ledge because, again, we talked about this earlier. I needed to do something practical. So I went to college, studied broadcasting, and I love this end of the story here. We're almost done. First day I'm at the college, I'm adjusting to this big, beautiful campus, 800 miles or 1,200 kilometers away from my hometown. I'm all by myself. I'm kind of lonely. My drums are back in my hometown. I didn't bring them along. I didn't play my trombone anymore because I'm now in college. But I found a piano. And I went over to the piano. And remember now, this was probably what? I'm 9, 10 years old when I tried to play the piano. Now I'm 18. I had years of experience of reading music and improvising jazz on trombone and drums. So I just said, I'm going to try this. So I sat down at a piano and I didn't play chopsticks. I just started to play chord progressions because they sounded pretty. And of course, if your piano players are watching this, I'm not being silly now. I can't reach the black keys because my toes.
I wondered that. I did wonder that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but what I did was I gave myself permission to do something that was not going to be judged by anybody but me. So I wasn't playing the piano to impress anybody. And of course, when people see me play the piano, they're very impressed. But I'm really not very good at it. That's not the point. You want to play the guitar, play the guitar. You want to play harmonica, play harmonica. You want to play a harp. I mean, whatever you want to play, folks watching this, you don't have to be a rock star to enjoy music. But I also believe, now we're going to get real philosophical, Doug, if we haven't already, music changed my whole way of being. Because now there was something I could do, that I could create, that I could make. And boy, that's a truly special thing. I never did cross that big threshold into writing music. I wish I would have. But I could definitely play music. When you create something yourself, that gives you a sense of being that is very, very powerful.
My older sister, she plays the piano by ear. She just listens to a song, sits down and just plays it. And I'm so jealous of her because piano is, I believe, either in a past life or a future life, one of them, I'm awesome at playing piano. Like I'm really good at it. But in this life, yeah, that's not happening. And when my music teacher was working with me and I would go and practice, occasionally I would put 3 to 5 seconds together and the feeling in my body, it just felt so good. It was just like, the resonance, it was just pure. But I just couldn't increase it to 10 seconds, 20 seconds of putting it together. Like I just, I would try so hard and I'd go back. Teacher would say, have you been practicing? Yeah. Okay, play away. And I'd play it. And she was so kind. And she'd go, oh, that's wonderful, Doug. She goes, now we're going to play it again. And when we play it again, on the little chart here where you're reading the music, we're going to include this bit here and that bit there and that bit there. And I'm like, you're kidding. You mean I actually left those bits out? And I practiced, like I thought I had it down pat. I'm thinking, I've smashed this like 10 seconds. I've got it. And she would be so kind. It's like, and then she goes, look, just listen, I'll play it. And then I'm like, oh, geez, I left half of it out. But to me, it sounded really good. And like, it was just, my whole body would just love it. It was like getting a massage, but different, like it was just like, oh, yeah. So I've watched videos of you playing those drums. They're crazy, like sort of almost, yeah, yeah. I don't know the terminology with the whole drums and all that stuff, but it's pretty
Well, to be
amazing
quite
what you
honest
do.
with you, I've met some very, very world-renowned drummers. One of my favorite examples, and again, I should have thought of this before we started this, but a Canadian rock band that was very big in the 70s and 80s by the name of Rush. They were a trio. They were a power trio, and they were very, very big all around the world, but especially being Canadian, very, very big. And I tell a story in my speech to mostly teenagers. This is not for just teenagers, but I talk about how the drummer of the band Rush was a guy by the name of Neil Peart. And Neil Peart, we've lost him a couple of years ago, probably 5 years ago now or more, sadly to cancer. But he was one of those people that played drums that were impossible to match, but it bugged me. So I would sit in my basement, put on Rush albums on our big stereo that we had in our home, and try to recreate how to play. But the two most important elements for people that play the drums, I can't use my bass drum with my foot or the hi-hat with my left foot. So the drum instructor that I told you about at camp showed me a way that I could use my toes by playing with my left stick on that thing they call the floor tom, which is a big drum that stands upright next to the snare drum. And I would play it with my left stick to create the bass drum. But therein was the problem. I couldn't be as crazy talented, clearly, as Neil Peart. But that's not the point. The point I try to make with people is it's the effort. It's the dedication. It's the drive to want to be the best. But when I'm talking to teenagers, I get very specific, talking about what teenager, I'm sure everybody watching this did in one way or another, even the ones that had gifts like sports or good looks or music, whatever. We've all struggled with self-esteem, all of us, because that's a natural trait of being a teenager, right? We got to grow up, as they say. I don't know about that. But the reality was, Neil Peart talked about in a documentary called The Rush Beyond the Lighted Stage, incredible documentary. When he was a teenager, he was geeky. So he got drums, and instrument became his instrument. I love this quote. Drums became his instrument of self-esteem. Isn't that a great line? And I couldn't agree with it more. Anyway, I used that line attributed to Mr. Peart at a big convention I was speaking at many, many years ago, 2012, actually, in Ontario, Canada, Niagara Falls. Everyone heard of Niagara Falls. Like 3,000 teenagers. That was the very early stages of YouTube. Somebody recorded it on a very, very new phone that had video, that somehow got online, that somehow made it to Rush's management, that somehow made an invitation to me. And it turned out I took my son, who's going to be 40 this summer, to a concert where we were front stage center, and I got a pair of drumsticks personally from Neil Peart. And I still have them right here. But what he said was, he got tears in his eyes. He said, it's an inspiration to see somebody like you play the drums with your feet. And no, you may never be a professional, but that's not the point. The joy that you get out of playing the drums is the most important thing. And yes, there's video. I'm going to, obviously I'm going to promote my website today, Doug. It's just alvinlaw.com. But if you can imagine some of the things that have happened to me, one of the highlights, 2022, and I can tell you the long story if you want to hear it, but it's not really worth the long time it takes to tell it. Played a concert in Japan where the headliner, I wasn't with her, but she was the headliner, and I was a member of a cast of performers for what was supposed to be the opening ceremonies of the 2020 Paralympics in Japan, which were canceled due to COVID, that bugger COVID, They put on a concert 2 years later in Japan. It was a one-off. It wasn't to do with the Olympics or Paralympics. And the headliner was Katy Perry. So you can imagine I'm at a concert in a theater where Katy Perry is around and she's hanging out. But more than anything, so was her band. When I have a conversation with a drummer, they can't believe this is impossible, apparently, to hold sticks between your toes like this and play. I don't know what impossible means, Doug, because that's the way I've always been. But drums are definitely the one that amazes people the most.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super, super cool. So just looking at my questions here. I'm just curious, do you feel that you chose to be on Earth at this time for any particular reason, or do you, some people believe in that sort of stuff, some don't? I'm just curious on what you think about your life and how it's played out and why you're here and what you do.
It's a very, very important question, and I'm not uncomfortable with the answer. Some of your viewers, probably if they're fans of yours, will be completely okay with this idea. There's no way at all that my being in this world was an accident. Everything was meant to be this way. How that happened is the question. This is where we get a little weird, all of us, trying to understand it. Let me give you the absolute, this could very well be one of the best examples you'll ever have on your show, okay? And that's not ego. But let's consider this. I'm born in the summer of 1960 without arms. At 5 days of age, I'm homeless because my birth family are too overwhelmed, but also guilt-ridden, which was very common, of the moms who took thalidomide because they blamed themselves, which I would, by the way, point out, I disagree with that, but then I'm not the mom, right? I'm the kid. So I'm 5 days old. What am I going to do? There's a lot of people who want to adopt children, okay? But I'm going to show you one more picture. This is my amateur attempt at PowerPoint, buddy. So let's just turn it so we can see it. There, see it?
Yep, yep.
I want your audience.
How old are you there?
A couple of months.
Right.
I don't honestly know exactly.
Yeah.
I can't ask my mom because she passed away in 96. But this is just a great picture. It's in my book.
Yeah.
But I want your audience to look at this, and I want them to not just look at it, but ponder this. What kind of plans would you make for a child like this if it was yours? Just a thought.
Yeah, wow.
My birth family saw no hope. So guess where I landed? In a foster home. We hear stories of foster homes all the time. Sadly, we hear bad stories, which is really bad because there's not all bad foster homes. In fact, it's the other way around. Every now and then there's a bad apple, like that cliche, okay? I end up in this foster home, and here's the key. My mom was 55 years old, and my dad was 53 years old, and they were empty nesters. That's not what they called them then. This was 1960. They took me in as a temporary stay, but I never left. Because as my parents would say, he kind of grows on you. Isn't that romantic? But it's true. There was something about me. So if we want to talk about intuition, because that's what you talk about, my mom had powerful intuition. Everybody said that. In fact, some people thought it was creepy what my mom would see coming, and it would come true. Not like a fortune teller. I don't want to be disrespectful, but she could just see stuff. There is word that is very much not common that we talked about when I was growing up, that my mom, when she looked at that picture of me with no arms, saw something completely different. Not a future, not a drummer, not a trombone player, but a totally independent, capable human being. I want to ask your audience one more rhetorical question. How did she have any clue what she was doing? There was no experience. She'd never taken care of a handicapped child of any kind. There was no internet. There was no research because I was born at the very beginning of when Canada started having thalidomide babies. They started around 1959 in Australia, if I'm accurate on that. So there was no record. And they were so uncommon, even though there was enough to be a problem. It wasn't like a big number, like hundreds of thousands. When I say under 20,000, that sounds like either a lot or a little, depending on how you put it in global positioning and think about it. So imagine all of this. How does my mom have any clue what to do? But at the same time, that's where her religious faith came in. So my mom struggled because she had a religious faith where it was blasphemy to question whether there's a hell or a heaven, where it's blasphemy to consider whether there's an afterlife, where it's blasphemy to think if we actually have reincarnation. Although, isn't there a couple of religions that are way bigger than Christianity that believe in reincarnation? Not to quibble now, but you know what I mean? So all those personal beliefs are gigantic. The trouble is we need to do a better job of respecting those beliefs, whether they appear odd or not. But one more little part of the story, we never talked about this when I was growing up. It was just my mom would figure something out. Picture this one. The first thing I remember doing, and if your audience wants to play this little game, picture in your mind, and I close my eyes just to create an image for you, but if you close your eyes and you think, what conjures up your first visual image of you being a child? Is it a good one or a negative one? Sadly, for some people, it's a negative image, so they try to put it out of their minds, which I'm not going to argue with. But when I close my eyes and think about it, I remember sewing, because mom was a seamstress. That's one of the things she did. So there was a big antique, not then, sewing machine in our basement with a treadle, no power, and mom would make clothes or alter clothes or do whatever. I would hang out with her. So I'm mimicking. So I learned how to sew with a needle and thread with my toes. Can you imagine picking up a needle between your toes?
Wow.
Threading
it. Whoa.
Right.
I can't thread them with my hands. Like,
precisely.
Yeah.
So people would say, Hilda Law, where did you come up with that? She goes, I don't know. Just gave him some buttons one day, a needle, some thread, and a rag, and said, sew. And that's what she would do. Now, is that intuition? I think so. It's something, right? Because who would think of that? Dad was a mechanic. He would bring home nuts and bolts from work, different sizes, and I would, screw them on and off and on and off for hours with my toes. You know why? So someday I could be a motivational speaker and go out and dazzle people? No, because this was a function. So they were all about function, but they were also not about what we today would call inclusion, which is under fire, it seems, worldwide. But this was just natural. Okay, now we have a child. Our other sons are way older, but here was the key. They were very, very ingrained in our community. So everybody knew my mom and dad. They bowled, they curled, great Canadian sport, right? They went to the Legion Hall. There were dances. We were members of our church. So everywhere we went, little Alvin was always in tow. And those people, because they were older, because theirs were my parents, they were like it was like hanging out with grandparents all the time. So they embraced the little boy with no arms, which gave me confidence, which gave me a mojo that has never gone away. You're asking where this attitude comes from? It's ingrained in me. I'm far from perfect, Doug, but I'll tell you what, this positivity, I found out, works. And I also found out negativity doesn't.
Yeah. Because in that era, like in the 60s, it was all about hiding people away who weren't perceived as not fitting the normal, bill. And so for your parents to like have you out in the public arena, or, like very visual all the time. Yeah. I'm just curious, something you mentioned earlier about playing soccer, football, whatever you want to call it. I'm curious. Yeah, sure. You don't use your hands in that game, but how, like, I would think when when I was 8, I played soccer for a year. I feel I used my arms for balance with running. Did you have any issues with that, or was your balance fine if you ran and stopped quickly, etc.?
I ran poorly. In other words, I wasn't a sprinter, but I could run quickly because my legs were so strong.
Right.
The structure, the construction of my legs, because I used them all the time, but also the rest of my body. My wife likes to joke that I have abs of steel. They don't really look like it. They look more like a steel drum. But, that's basically the truth. I am very, very, I was more so then. Now, clearly I'm 64. But I was very, very healthy and very fit. But the point is, too, this is where, again, I'm so blessed, and not in a religious way. It didn't matter if I couldn't play well, because we lived in a community where everybody was my age. All these young families where my mom and dad happened to buy their house had kids my age. So we rode together. I couldn't ride a bike, but I had a tricycle. And as my tricycle got bigger, because I got bigger, I customized it. I probably had the only tricycle in the 1960s with what we called a sissy bar, those ones on the back of the bike, and a banana seat on a tricycle.
Right.
Nobody made fun of it because my dad made it for me, not physically. He altered a regular tricycle. But if you think about it, I could drive the pedal wheels with my feet and turn, but I would go biking with my friends. They didn't make fun of it. See, again, this was not the perfect scenario, but it was a different era.
Mm.
It was so uncommon to have a
Mm.
kid with no arms, yet not in Yorkton, Saskatchewan, because
Yeah.
that's what people knew. So I'll give you a great example. You talk about football or soccer. One of my favorite mindsets was bowling. We didn't have 10 pin. We had 5 pin. I'm not sure if that's even a thing in
Oh,
Australia. It's a
haven't seen
smaller
that. No.
ball,
Mm.
right? Smaller ball, 5 pins, same length of alley. There was an old guy that ran the bowling alley. He was a grumpy old man, unless Alvin came into the bowling alley. It was like I cracked his code. He was so almost embarrassed that he had a heart. Nobody was allowed to walk past the foul line on his pristine bowling lanes. But for Alvin, he would come down, take me with him, go halfway down the alley, allow me to sit on my bum and push the bowling ball with both my feet so I'd have a better chance of knocking down the pins.
Right.
Those things, people would say that's patronizing. And I would say, and what's wrong with that?
Yeah. They allowed you to function at the level you were at as a young child. Like, yeah. I mean, what in our bowling alleys now, we have bumpers to stop so
Yeah.
your ball doesn't go. And it's all automated because we take our grandkids and when we punch their name in, we hit the button. And so when it's their name comes on the screen and it's their turn to bowl, the bumpers just automatically come out. And so they don't put the balls down the gutters. I mean, is that patronizing? It's
I
just,
hear that.
yeah.
I would disagree with the concept, but I get why it's there.
Mm.
We and maybe we've gone a little too far that way in terms of self-esteem. But I get
Yeah.
it. I
Yeah.
understand it. But the other thing too that I think frankly is very important. I never said to myself, "Oh, I want to be a professional bowler." And I just put it in context. Oh, this is fun.
Yeah.
And even today, I can't remember the last time my wife and I went bowling, but we used to go regularly when my son was young, and same thing. I wouldn't go halfway down the alley, but I could still push that ball from the foul line with my feet. And
Yeah.
I would, every now and then I'd get lucky and knock down a few pins. It was participation
Yeah.
that was the key.
Yeah. Yeah. And not sort of just wanting to sit at home and
Yeah.
hide away.
Well,
Just,
we sure did. We didn't. I mean, I hate to pull the old person card here, but we just didn't do that.
mm,
I hate the cliche, but it's a great one. It was the 60s. It was the 70s. It was a different time. And in
mm,
small town Canada, it was even more of a different time because,
mm,
being free range, to use a kind of a modern expression, was not free range. It was just the way kids were. Therefore, I was allowed to be part of that and not shunned. But I was so lucky. Now, did I have a couple of people make fun of me over time? Of course I did. None of us are immune. But in most respects, my life was one that said, "You're so lucky." And I knew that. I knew that I was adopted. But of course, I never got to meet my birth family because in those days, you didn't do that.
mm,
I would do that as an adult, but not as a child.
yeah.
But if we were to pull up a wonderful argument, and I don't mean a negative argument, a really good debate, nurture versus nature. What do you believe in? See, I believe in nature because that's what happened nurture, not nature. I believe in nurture. I got that backwards because nature would have meant my blood was a member of this particular family, but I was not by nature raised to do the things I do. It was nurturing on the hard part of my parents and my community that pushed
Mm,
me to a level where, yeah, it seems to be incredible what I can do with my feet. And I
yeah.
acknowledge that. But at the end of the day, I think what's amazing is not me, were my parents.
Mm. It's something I just want to go back there. I was thinking about earlier, quite a while ago, you mentioned about that band teacher and he couldn't let it go. Like he was embarrassed. He hung up the phone. He's like, oh, wow. And like you say, like something ate away at him. And was it his intuition? Just keep coming back to him. We've got to come up with something. And like you say, that was a pivotal, life-changing moment for you. And it might have made him feel a little bit better that he'd redeemed himself from his faux pas with being ignorant to who you were or whatever. But yeah, he created a life-changing moment for you that took you to another level, another notch in life, etc. So that's, yeah, with intuition, it's a wonderful thing. So I'm curious now, how do you see the world now? Like good, bad, ugly, magnificent? What?
I think it's impossible to give an assessment because so much of the world now judges its consciousness by social media. And I don't think that's a very good idea. I think because, okay, I'm going to get in trouble now. I just want to caution the audience because I'm very blunt. Do you have anything better to do with your time than be on Facebook? Come on, really? There's got to be more out there for you folks. And we get caught up in this. But I had a theory that I think is pretty accurate. I'm going to throw it out at your audience. I am a professional speaker that has a stage. It reminds me of being in England the first time a million years ago. And I didn't do this then, but I was fascinated by the concept of the speaker's corner in Hyde Park. I went there as a child, and it was different then. You know, it was very different then. Now it's very much a Hyde Park in England and London is full of immigrants, and it's become its own debate. The point is, professionally, I have like my speaker's corner. So I have a podium that I can get up on stage to give people my take on the world. 99% of the population before the internet didn't have a stage, and now they do. And the spotlight is very compelling. It's very much a power thing. When we get the spotlight on us, people are listening to us, and I can give my opinion, which means I'm worth something. The trouble is, how often do we see positive things on social media versus negative things? I know they're out there. I put them out there all the time. But the state of the world right now, I wish, maybe I'm 64 and that's the answer. I wish it was like it was when I was in the 60s and 70s, where everybody was, you know, love and peace and hippies and, you know, all that loose living and the way that we wanted to make everybody happy. It seems like where we've gotten to, and I'm going to be this is going to be a bit opinionated, we became a me generation versus a we world. And the problem, of course, is we are a we world. And again, you know, I wake up today and I find there's bombs again in Israel and in Palestine. And we could talk about geopolitics and how wrong that is. I could get into a diatribe and rant about living next door to the United States, and the biggest you-know-what that ever managed to crawl out of a rock is running the United States. That's how I feel about him. But the problem is, doesn't matter how I feel about Donald Trump because he got elected. What worries me more is how he got elected. We've become a very divided world, and politics is driving the division. And the problem with that, if you're talking to Alvin Law, the philosopher now, is when did we get off track? Because this is a beautiful world. I remember one of the most amazing moments. I want to share this real quick. 1996 came to Australia for the first time. I was actually speaking for an organization called Apex, the Service Club, right? Mm-hmm. And I was brought there to speak at a convention. And I brought my wife, and we stayed in Sydney for 3 days at a hotel that wasn't far from the harbor and the opera house. So we walked down the first morning, bit of jet lag, went over, had to go right to the opera house, because who doesn't, right? When you're in Sydney.
Yep.
We're sitting on the steps of the opera house, and I turned to my wife, and she's crying. I said, "What are you crying about?" She says, "Because I totally forgot about this. When I was a kid, I didn't put up posters in my room of, like, you know, the rock stars of the day, or the heartthrobs, or the teenage, you know, heroes, those posters, you know, whoever they were then." She says, "I put up posters of places that I hope to see in my life. And one of them was a poster of the Sydney Opera House. And here I am. I never thought I'd get here." And then she said, "Because I met you, I had a dream come true today." So we hugged and kissed, and it was a beautiful moment. But that was what I vividly remember. Have we lost the awe of being alive? Yeah. That's what worries me. because it is wonderful to be alive. And it doesn't have to be on the steps of the Sydney Opera House. Just being alive in today is becoming way too complicated because it just feels like there's something going on out there that wants to push us off this pedestal of loving being alive, because there's so much reality that people are enacting. And in fact, even more importantly, insulting each other. That's just not the way to be human. That's what I think.
True. No, I hear you. And I very much relate to the Sydney Opera House thing. When I was 15, when I hopped on a bus and went to Sydney with a friend for overnight, and we went to see an Elton John concert. But when we arrived, we wandered down to the Opera House, and I was gobsmacked. It was, and I don't go to Sydney very often, but each time I do, when we wander down have a walk around the Opera House, it truly is an amazing building. And I don't think a lot of buildings, they're artificial constructs sort of thing. It's not nature, but that building, it's got a vibe, and you're right on the harbour, and it's just, yeah, it's a magnificent place to be. And yeah, I hear you. Like and I could see, as soon as you said that about your wife, I thought, I know she's had posters up on the wall, and now finally the dream came true.
But you know what's wonderful, Doug? Sorry to interrupt you, but now that I brought this story up, there's a 30-second add-on that's a beautiful story. So we're in Sydney. We're young. This was 1996. We only met in 1991, both divorced, both with exes. My ex was the one that produced the next to be 40-year-old in August, my son Vance. My wife, Darlene, now, we've been together since 1991, could not have children, but we got married in 1993. So we were kind of almost newlywedish, right? 1996. Love to go clubbing, love to go to bars. And of course, Sydney, wonderful row of bars. Found a jazz club. I love jazz. Went in, the jazz club was packed. I have to sit down to have a drink. So I'll give you an example. Here's a physical example, right? Little green mug from St. Patrick's Day here. A physical ability to do this, but I can't stand and drink. Now, my wife could hold the drink for me, and I can use a straw. Or I don't need a straw. I can actually reach up with the cup.
Yep.
Point is, there was nowhere to sit. So we're wandering around. Darlene's got 2 drinks, 2 beers, in fact. And we're trying to figure out, and a guy sees us. And he says, "Would you like my chair?" It was up against the bar, one of the high stools. Sure, very generous. Oh, my pleasure. Looks like you need a little bit of space to use your feet there. Well, of course, that began a conversation. You can't make this stuff up, Doug. This guy says, because Darlene was saying, we're first here, we just got here from Canada, went and saw the Opera House today, I cried, what a beautiful thing. The guy says, "Would you like a private tour?" And we're like, "Excuse me?" He goes, "Would you like a private tour of the Sydney Opera House?" And we're like, "Are you joking?" He goes, "No, I am the head security guard for the Sydney Opera House. Just down having a pint after work today." He goes, "I'd be more than happy. What are you doing tomorrow?" Had no plans for 2 days. "Well, why don't you meet me at the front doors of the Sydney Opera House tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock? I'll take you on a private tour." And that's exactly what he did. So talk about a vibe of a building. Yeah. But my favorite moment, and I do have a picture of this somewhere, going on stage where they had the symphony, the Sydney Symphony was set up to have a concert. So all of their chairs and all of their music stands and all of their music books were on the stands. So I went right down on the stage of the Sydney Opera House and went to the trombone section, to the lead chair, because that's what I played in high school. I was lead chair trombone, which is a big deal, and stood there and imagined playing trombone in the Sydney Opera House. And I'm getting hairs on the back of my neck right now, just even thinking about it. There's more to a building than brick and mortar. There's something about that place, but those places are everywhere. Yeah. And I think that's what also we need to reevaluate in our present mindset, is let's not forget about the beauty, because the beauty is everywhere.
You've just inspired me to do some looking into the Opera House and go there. I've never been inside it. I've only ever
No.
wandered around the outside. So I've never, I need to go to some sort of event or something that's going on
Well, that you can
inside.
get a tour,
Yeah, right. Yeah. Oh, I'd love
even
to
if you
go
don't go
there
to a
when
concert.
there's a concert going on or something like that. Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah. My wife and I did for our 20th wedding anniversary a long time ago. Flew to Sydney for the night. We wandered around the Opera House, and then we went and saw the Lion King play. But it wasn't
Ah,
at the Opera House; it was at another theatre elsewhere, and that was superb. But had it been at the Opera House, it would have been the ultimate. But yeah, yeah, that is something I need to do, is wander inside that building. And my niece lives in Sydney now, and she's quite musical, and she has performed on that stage. And that was a huge treat for her, I can tell you. Yeah, yeah, wow. Excellent. So I've got one last question for you. And it's, if your microphone was connected to all 8.2 billion people on the planet right now, and you knew they wouldn't judge, blame, or shame you for anything you said, what would you say to them, Alvin?
I would ask people to stop being so angry at inequity, at the problems that our world faces, even though they're real, and start to take more private times and moments for yourself to remember how blessed and lucky you are to have what you have. We all are missing things. We all believe that if we had those things, we'd be happier. But I believe this more than I believe anything else, Doug, and it's a great question. When you grow up without arms, and one more time, I'm not perfect, but you grow up learning to appreciate what you still have left. And you start to see life in a different way. Because people would say, do you wish you had arms? Why? Why would I wish that? I am who I am because I have no arms. And I did get to meet my birth family in 1993. So I was even more able to assess my belief system. They weren't bad people. But my birth mom, Sophie, is her name, would not have pushed me. She would have mourned me. Mom and Dad Law taught me to celebrate every single day because life is such a treasure. And I know there's a lot of reasons why people would argue against that. Poverty, hunger, starvation, storms, global warming. See, all of those things are on that other side of the equation. They're very real. But at the same time, so is the reality of our blessings in our life that don't have to be about religion. Just how lucky are we?
Awesome. That's a wonderful way to end this podcast, Alvin. Thank you for that. I've been enthralled with our conversation today. And then like a week ago when we met and talked on Zoom, that was a wonderful time as well. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure, Doug. And by the way, one more thing. Thank you for what you do, putting out the words that are good and the stories that are inspirational and the thoughts that maybe the world is not all that bad, because you're balancing all of the things that are bad. Thank you for you, sir.
Well, we're at the end of another thought-provoking episode. Remember to subscribe so you'll be alerted to new episodes. I want to say thank you to the men who are joining me on this journey of intuitive development. I truly hope our time together has expanded your reality and reinforced trust in your ever-reliable gut feeling. Embrace your intuition. It will not lead you astray. Until next time, stay tuned, stay curious, and trust your gut.